The stars of the galaxy had never seemed so dark. Across thousands of worlds, fear had become stronger than hope. For more than 30 years, the Galactic Council had fought against an enemy known only as the Void Swarm. No one knew where the creatures had come from. They appeared from deep space without warning, attacking colony after colony. Their fleets were endless. Their ships moved like living shadows, and they showed no interest in peace, trade, or communication. They existed only to consume, destroy, and move forward. Entire civilizations had disappeared beneath their advance. Great planets that once shined with life were now silent ruins floating in empty space. The strongest military powers in the galaxy had tried everything. They had built larger fleets, developed stronger weapons, and formed alliances that would have been impossible before the war. None of it mattered. The Void Swarm kept coming. One by one, every defense line collapsed. On the Council capital world of Arion Prime, the atmosphere was heavy with despair. The giant council chamber, once filled with confidence and debate, had become a place of fear. Representatives from dozens of species sat quietly around the circular hall, staring at the massive holographic map floating above them. Every few minutes, another sector on the map turned red. Another world lost. Another fleet destroyed. Council leader Hanul stood at the center platform and watched the updates arrive. He had led the council for 12 years, but never had he seen such hopeless reports. Beside him stood Mira, the council's chief military advisor. She studied the battlefield data with tired eyes. Days had passed since she had slept properly. Every report told the same story. Every battle ended in defeat. Sector 9 has fallen, an officer announced from a nearby station. No one reacted. The room had heard too many similar reports. A few moments later, another voice spoke. The defense fleet at Karen Station has been destroyed. Again, silence followed. The council members no longer had the energy to argue. They knew the truth. The galaxy was losing. Mira finally broke the silence. At the current rate, the Void Swarm will reach Arion Prime within 6 months. A wave of unease spread across the chamber. Some representatives lowered their heads. Others simply stared into space. Hanul knew what they were thinking. Arion Prime was not just another world. It was the heart of galactic civilization. If it fell, organized resistance would end. The remaining worlds would be isolated and destroyed one by one. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then an elderly council historian named Jisoo slowly rose from her seat. Her white hair and calm expression made her seem older than anyone else in the room. She rarely spoke during military discussions, but this time her voice carried unusual weight. There may be one option left, she said quietly. Several heads turned toward her. Hanul frowned. What option? Jisoo hesitated before answering. A species that was removed from galactic affairs centuries ago. The room immediately grew restless. Some representatives exchanged nervous glances. Others looked confused. Mira folded her arms. You're talking about the humans. Jisoo nodded. At once, the chamber erupted with whispers. Humanity was not a forgotten name. It was a forbidden one. Hundreds of years earlier, humans had entered the galactic stage and shocked everyone. Compared to older civilizations, they were young and technologically behind. Yet whenever conflict appeared, humans adapted with frightening speed. They fought harder, learned faster, and survived situations that should have destroyed them. Their military victories became legendary. During several ancient wars, human commanders achieved impossible victories against overwhelming odds. Entire enemy fleets vanished after facing human forces. Some civilizations called humans heroes. Others called them monsters. Eventually, the council became concerned about how dangerous humanity might become. Rather than risk future conflict, an agreement was reached. Humanity would remain isolated inside its own territory. Trade would continue, but direct involvement in galactic politics and military affairs would end. Over time, most species forgot about them. That was centuries ago, one representative argued. They haven't participated in galactic affairs since then. Maybe for good reason, another replied nervously. Jisoo remained calm. Perhaps, but every other option has failed. Mira looked at the holographic map. Red lights continued spreading across the galaxy. The void swarm had destroyed civilizations far older and stronger than humanity. Yet something about Jisu's suggestion stayed in her mind. Ancient military records described humans differently than modern history books. They were not simply warriors. They were survivors. They refused to quit. Even when victory seemed impossible, they continued fighting. Hanul slowly turned toward the historian. Do we still have contact coordinates for Earth? Jisu nodded. They were sealed under emergency authorization. I can access them. The room became silent once more. Everyone understood the meaning of this discussion. Calling humanity would be admitting total failure. It would mean the galaxy could no longer save itself. Hanul closed his eyes briefly before speaking. Prepare a vote. One by one, representatives entered their decisions. The results appeared above the chamber. The vote was not unanimous, but it was clear. The majority supported contacting humanity. Desperation had overcome fear. Hanul stared at the final result and felt the weight of history pressing down on him. Then we proceed. Jisu activated a hidden archive deep beneath the council network. Ancient files appeared on the central display. Coordinates, diplomatic records, and communication protocols that had remained untouched for centuries came back to life. Engineers rushed to prepare a long-range transmission. Mira watched as technicians worked through the night. The message was simple. It contained battlefield data, casualty reports, and one direct request. The Galactic Council needed help. Hours later, the transmission array was ready. Massive energy generators powered the system. Across the capital world, lights dimmed as power flowed into the communication network. Every council member gathered to witness the moment. Hanul stood beside Mira and Jisu as the countdown began. 10, 9, 8. The giant array outside the city glowed with blue energy. 7, 6, 5. The signal locked onto the ancient coordinates. 4, 3, 2, 1. The message launched into the darkness between stars. For a moment, nobody moved. The transmission had been sent. There was nothing left to do except wait. Days passed, then weeks. The war continued. More sectors fell. More fleets disappeared. Arion Prime prepared for siege. Defensive stations surrounded the system while evacuation plans were discussed in secret. Many believed the message had failed. Perhaps humanity no longer existed. Perhaps they had ignored the request. Perhaps the signal would never arrive. Then, 23 days after transmission, an alert suddenly appeared inside the Council Command Center. Communication officers froze in disbelief. A signal had arrived. It matched the exact frequency used for the emergency message. Within minutes, Hanul, Mira, and Jisu rushed into the command chamber. The incoming transmission appeared on the main screen. The room became completely silent. Everyone watched as the message was decoded. Thousands of eyes focused on the display. The response contained only 3 words. No explanations, no questions, no demands. Just 3 simple words. Hanul read them aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. Message received. Preparing. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Mira stared at the screen as a strange feeling spread through her chest. For the first time in many years, it was not fear. It was hope. Somewhere beyond the stars, beyond the collapsing front lines and endless darkness, humanity had heard the call. And they were coming. The message spread across Arion Prime faster than any military report ever had. For the first time in years, people spoke about something other than defeat. Humanity had answered. The words were short, but they carried a strange sense of confidence that no one could explain. Hanul read the message again and again, hoping to find more hidden meaning within it, but there was nothing else. No promises, no plans, no details. Only 3 words. Message received. Preparing. Days turned into weeks as the council waited. The void swarm did not stop advancing. Entire star systems vanished from the galactic map. Refugee ships crowded every safe route. Military commanders desperately moved what remained of their fleets toward Arion Prime. The capital system had become the final shield protecting the heart of civilization. Mira spent every day inside the command center studying battle reports. She wanted to believe humanity would arrive, but even she struggled to hold on to hope. No one had seen human military forces in centuries. For all they knew, humanity might send only a handful of ships. Worse, they might arrive too late. One morning, alarms suddenly echoed through the command center. Officers immediately rushed to their stations. Holographic displays flashed red across the room. Mira looked up sharply. Report. A communications officer swallowed nervously. Long-range sensors have detected multiple hyperspace disturbances at the edge of the capital system. Hanul quickly entered the room alongside Jisu. The swarm? He asked. The officer shook his head. Unknown. The signatures don't match any known fleet. Every eye turned toward the giant tactical display. At first there was only darkness. Then the stars themselves seemed to twist. Massive waves of energy spread across space as reality bent open. One hyperspace rupture appeared. Then another. Then dozens more. The room fell silent. Even experienced military officers stared in disbelief. Ships began emerging from the glowing tears in space. The first vessel alone was larger than some cities. It moved slowly but carried a sense of overwhelming power. Behind it came another, then hundreds more. Within minutes, an entire fleet filled the edge of the system. The ships looked unlike anything the Council had ever built. Their hulls were dark gray and covered with armor layers so thick they resembled mountains of metal. Massive weapon batteries lined their sides. Some ships carried visible battle scars that had clearly never been repaired. Instead of hiding damage, the humans seemed to wear it with pride. Mira stared at the display. How many? She whispered. A sensor analyst checked the numbers twice before answering. Over 3,000 warships confirmed. More still arriving. Gasps filled the room. The Council's strongest fleets before the war had contained only a fraction of that number. Yet what shocked them most was not the fleet's size. It was its organization. Every vessel moved with perfect coordination. There was no confusion, no wasted movement, and no delay. It was as if the entire armada shared one mind. A transmission request arrived moments later. Hanul accepted it immediately. The main screen flickered before revealing a human command bridge. Several officers stood at their stations calmly. At the center stood a tall man with short dark hair and a stern expression. His uniform carried no decorations except a single silver emblem. His eyes were steady and confident. He did not look like a man arriving to save a dying galaxy. He looked like a man arriving for a routine assignment. I am Admiral June Park of the United Earth Defense Fleet, he said. His voice was calm and clear. We received your distress signal. For a moment, nobody spoke. Finally, Hanul stepped forward. You came. June nodded slightly. You asked for help. The simple answer somehow carried more weight than a long speech ever could. Mira studied the human admiral carefully. There was no fear in his voice. No uncertainty. He spoke as if the void swarm was merely another problem waiting to be solved. Hanul quickly explained the current situation. The swarm had conquered hundreds of worlds. Multiple defense lines had fallen. The capital system itself was expected to come under attack within weeks. June listened without interruption. When the report ended, he simply asked one question. Where is the enemy fleet now? The tactical map appeared beside him. Several enormous swarm armadas were shown advancing toward Arion Prime. Most military experts considered their arrival unstoppable. June stared at the data for a few moments before nodding. Good. Mira blinked in surprise. Good. June folded his arms. That saves us time. The room became silent again. Some officers exchanged confused looks. Jisu raised an eyebrow. You don't seem concerned. A faint smile appeared on the admiral's face. Concerned people lose wars. Before anyone could respond, another human officer entered the frame carrying a data tablet. June reviewed it briefly before turning back toward the council. Additional fleets will arrive within the next 6 days. Hanul frowned. Additional fleets? June nodded. The first wave is already here. The rest are still traveling. Several council members nearly fell out of their seats. If this was only the first wave, humanity's military strength was far beyond anything they had imagined. Over the following days, the capital system transformed. More human ships arrived every hour. Giant carriers, battleships, cruisers, and support vessels emerged from hyperspace. Construction platforms immediately began reinforcing defensive positions. Human engineers worked around the clock. Massive weapon stations appeared in orbit. Supply routes were established with incredible efficiency. Even exhausted council officers found themselves impressed. Humanity moved with speed and purpose unlike anything they had ever seen. Mira spent several days working directly with Admiral June. The more she observed him, the more puzzled she became. Human commanders approached warfare differently. They did not focus only on defense. They constantly searched for opportunities to attack. Even when discussing worst-case scenarios, they spoke about victory rather than survival. During one strategy meeting, Mira finally asked the question that had been bothering her. Why did humanity stay isolated all these centuries? June looked at the stars outside the observation window before answering. Because the galaxy feared what humans become during war. Mira remained silent. June continued. The stories you remember are probably true. Humans can be dangerous. We adapt quickly. We fight hard. Sometimes too hard. And now? Mira asked. June's expression became serious. Now your enemy has forced humanity back onto the battlefield. Several days later, long-range sensors detected the approaching void swarm. The enemy fleet was larger than any previous assault force. Thousands of black organic vessels moved through space like a living storm. Entire regions of darkness seemed to swallow the stars around them. The sight alone terrified experienced commanders. Emergency alerts spread across the capital system. Defensive fleets moved into position. Civilian shelters activated. Every person on Arion Prime understood that the final battle might be approaching. Inside the command center, tension filled the air. Officers monitored incoming data while council representatives watched nervously. Yet one person remained completely calm. Admiral June stood near the tactical display studying the enemy formation. There was no fear on his face. No hesitation. Mira noticed it immediately. "What are you thinking?" she asked. June looked toward the advancing armada. His eyes seemed almost amused. The enemy fleet continued moving deeper into the system, completely unaware of what awaited them. Human ships slowly adjusted their positions. Hidden signals passed between thousands of vessels. Plans years in the making were quietly falling into place. Finally, June smiled. It was not the smile of someone preparing for a desperate defense. It was the smile of a hunter watching prey walk into a trap. Without taking his eyes off the approaching enemy, he spoke 4 simple words that sent a chill through everyone in the room. "Good," he said softly. "Now they're all here." The silence inside the command center lasted only a few seconds after Admiral June spoke those words, but for Mira it felt much longer. Everyone could see the enormous void swarm fleet moving steadily toward Arion Prime. Thousands of enemy vessels filled the tactical display like a black ocean spreading across space. The council had faced similar numbers before, and every time the result had been disaster. Yet June seemed almost pleased by what he was seeing. Hanul stepped closer to the display. "Admiral, with respect, that fleet is larger than any force we have encountered." June nodded calmly. "I know. Then why are you smiling?" Hanul asked. June looked at the approaching enemy and answered simply, "Because they are doing exactly what we hoped they would do." Confused looks spread across the room. Human officers standing nearby showed no surprise. It was obvious they already understood something the council did not. Over the next several hours, the enemy fleet crossed deeper into the capital system. Strangely, human ships began slowly pulling back from some of their outer defensive positions. Several council commanders immediately protested. To them it looked like a retreat. Mira watched the movements carefully. "You're giving them more space," she said. June nodded. "Yes. Why?" "Because predators become careless when they think they are winning." The answer made little sense to most of the officers, but human fleets continued adjusting their positions. Every movement appeared planned. Nothing happened by accident. Meanwhile, deep inside the human flagship, hundreds of specialists worked non-stop. Intelligence teams analyzed enemy communication patterns. Tactical officers tracked every swarm vessel. Advanced computers processed enormous amounts of battlefield data. Humanity had not spent centuries sitting idle. During their isolation, they had studied every piece of information available about galactic warfare. After receiving the Council's distress signal, they had spent weeks preparing for this exact moment. Unknown to the Council, the battle had already begun long before the fleets entered the system. Far beyond the visible front lines, small human reconnaissance ships had secretly entered swarm-controlled territory. Their mission was dangerous and simple: find the enemy's weakness. For years the galaxy had assumed the Void Swarm operated as a single endless force. Human analysts disagreed. June believed that no military system, no matter how advanced, could function without some form of command structure. The challenge was finding it. Days earlier, one of those reconnaissance teams had finally succeeded. Led by Captain Hannah Kim, a veteran intelligence officer, the small group had traveled deep into enemy territory using stolen sensor signatures and advanced stealth technology. They observed the swarm from hidden positions, collecting data that no one else had ever managed to obtain. What they discovered changed everything. The Void Swarm was not truly one mind. It was controlled by several massive command organisms hidden behind the front lines. These creatures coordinated fleet movements and transmitted orders throughout the swarm network. The silence inside the command center lasted only a few seconds after Admiral June spoke those words, but for Mira it felt much longer. Everyone could see the enormous Void Swarm fleet moving steadily toward Arion Prime. Thousands of enemy vessels filled the tactical display like a black ocean spreading across space. The Council had faced similar numbers before, and every time the result had been disaster. Yet June seemed almost pleased by what he was seeing. Hanul stepped closer to the display. "Admiral, with respect, that fleet is larger than any force we have encountered." June nodded calmly. "I know. Then why are you smiling?" Hanul asked. June looked at the approaching enemy and answered simply, "Because they are doing exactly what we hoped they would do." Confused looks spread across the room. Human officers standing nearby showed no surprise. It was obvious they already understood something the Council did not. Over the next several hours, the enemy fleet crossed deeper into the capital system. Strangely, human ships began slowly pulling back from some of their outer defensive positions. Several Council commanders immediately protested. To them it looked like a retreat. Mira watched the movements carefully. "You're giving them more space," she said. June nodded. "Yes. Why?" "Because predators become careless when they think they are winning." The answer made little sense to most of the officers, but human fleets continued adjusting their positions. Every movement appeared planned. Nothing happened by accident. Meanwhile, deep inside the human flagship, hundreds of specialists worked non-stop. Intelligence teams analyzed enemy communication patterns. Tactical officers tracked every swarm vessel. Advanced computers processed enormous amounts of battlefield data. Humanity had not spent centuries sitting idle. During their isolation, they had studied every piece of information available about galactic warfare. After receiving the Council's distress signal, they had spent weeks preparing for this exact moment. Unknown to the Council, the battle had already begun long before the fleets entered the system. Far beyond the visible front lines, small human reconnaissance ships had secretly entered swarm-controlled territory. Their mission was dangerous and simple: find the enemy's weakness. For years the galaxy had assumed the Void Swarm operated as a single endless force. Human analysts disagreed. June believed that no military system, no matter how advanced, could function without some form of command structure. The challenge was finding it. Days earlier, one of those reconnaissance teams had finally succeeded. Led by Captain Hannah Kim, a veteran intelligence officer, the small group had traveled deep into enemy territory using stolen sensor signatures and advanced stealth technology. They observed the swarm from hidden positions, collecting data that no one else had ever managed to obtain. What they discovered changed everything. The Void Swarm was not truly one mind. It was controlled by several massive command organisms hidden behind the front lines. These creatures coordinated fleet movements and transmitted orders throughout the swarm network. Destroy them, and the enemy would lose much of its coordination. Humanity finally had a target. Back in the present, as the enemy advanced toward Arion Prime, Hannah's team transmitted their latest findings. The information arrived directly on June's command screen. He reviewed it silently before giving a small nod. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Mira noticed his reaction. "Good news?" she asked. "Very good news," June replied. He turned toward several human officers. "Begin Phase 2. Immediately, orders spread across the fleet. Human ships continued withdrawing from selected sectors, creating what appeared to be weaknesses in the defense line. The Void Swarm reacted exactly as predicted. Large enemy formations rushed toward the openings. Council commanders became increasingly nervous. One officer named Day looked ready to panic. "They're breaking through," he shouted. "We need to reinforce those positions immediately." June shook his head. No. Day stared at him in disbelief. "They're advancing. They're being guided," June corrected. The difference was important, though few understood it. The enemy believed they were exploiting weaknesses. In reality, humanity was shaping their movement. Every gap, every retreat, every defensive adjustment had been carefully designed. The swarm was being pushed toward specific regions of space without realizing it. Hours passed. The enemy continued deeper into the system. Human losses remained surprisingly low. Whenever the swarm concentrated its attacks, human ships withdrew before becoming trapped. Then they struck from another direction. It was not a defensive battle. It was a controlled operation. Mira slowly began seeing the pattern. "You're hurting them," she said quietly. June smiled. "Exactly." The realization sent a chill through her. Humanity was treating one of the most terrifying forces in galactic history like prey. Across the capital system, millions watched the battle unfold. News broadcasts reported every movement. Fear remained strong, but people noticed something unusual. Human commanders never seemed desperate. They never issued emergency orders. Their fleets moved with confidence, even when facing overwhelming numbers. That confidence slowly spread among the population. For the first time in decades, hope was becoming stronger than fear. Meanwhile, hidden operations continued beyond the battlefield. Hannah and her team had not returned home. Instead, they moved even deeper into enemy territory. Using information gathered during previous missions, they located one of the command organisms responsible for coordinating nearby swarm fleets. The creature was enormous, larger than most space stations. It floated within a heavily protected region surrounded by countless escort vessels. Destroying it would not be easy, yet Hannah's team had no intention of fighting a direct battle. Human strategy relied on precision rather than waste. As the main fleet battle drew more enemy attention, Hannah's small force slipped through security gaps and approached the target undetected. Back at Arion Prime, the decisive moment finally arrived. The Void Swarm had entered exactly the regions humanity wanted them to occupy. Massive enemy formations gathered around several key sectors. To the Council, it still appeared chaotic. To June, it looked perfect. He stood before the tactical display while officers monitored thousands of developing situations. Hanul watched him carefully. "This is the trap, isn't it?" June nodded. "Most of it." "Most?" Hanul asked. "The rest is happening where the enemy isn't looking." At that same moment, Hannah's strike team reached attack range. Hidden launch systems activated silently. Precision weapons fired directly into the command organism's weak points. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the giant creature exploded into a cloud of burning debris. Throughout nearby swarm fleets, confusion spread instantly. Coordinated formations broke apart. Orders stopped arriving. Some enemy vessels drifted without direction. Others collided with each other. Similar operations were occurring elsewhere. Additional human teams attacked other command targets hidden across enemy territory. One by one, critical pieces of the swarm's control network disappeared. June watched incoming reports arrive. Every success increased the probability of victory. Finally, he turned toward his senior officers. Activate all hidden platforms. The command traveled across the entire battlefield. Seconds later, space itself seemed to come alive. Regions that had appeared empty suddenly revealed enormous weapon stations hidden behind asteroids, moons, and artificial camouflage fields. Thousands of platforms emerged simultaneously. Their engines powered up. Their weapons locked onto pre-selected targets. The Void Swarm had unknowingly advanced directly into the center of a gigantic human ambush. Council officers stared at their displays in disbelief. Entire sectors filled with previously invisible defenses. The enemy fleet, so confident only moments earlier, was now surrounded from multiple directions. Mira felt her heart racing as realization struck her. Humanity had spent every available day preparing this battlefield. Nothing had been left to chance. Every retreat, every movement, every apparent weakness had served a purpose. The swarm had not cornered humanity. Humanity had lured the swarm exactly where they wanted it. Across the command center, alarms suddenly shifted from warning signals to attack confirmations. Thousands of human weapon systems completed targeting calculations. Energy levels surged across the battlefield. June looked at the tactical display one final time. His expression remained calm, but his eyes reflected complete certainty. Around him, human officers prepared for the next phase. The trap was ready. The enemy was surrounded. The hunters had become the hunted. Then, throughout the capital system, thousands of hidden human weapons platforms activated at the exact same moment, and the darkness of space exploded with light. The darkness of space vanished beneath an ocean of light as thousands of hidden human weapons platforms fired at once. Brilliant beams of energy crossed the battlefield from every direction, striking the tightly packed formations of the Void Swarm. Explosions erupted across the enemy fleet. Massive organic vessels that had survived countless battles suddenly broke apart under the concentrated assault. Throughout the capital system, shock spread among the council officers watching the battle. For years they had only seen reports of defeat. Now they were witnessing something completely different. They were watching the Void Swarm lose. Inside the command center on Arion Prime, alarms filled the air, but this time they carried good news. Enemy ships were being destroyed faster than new formations could organize. Mira stared at the tactical display in disbelief. Entire sections of the swarm fleet were disappearing. The carefully planned trap had worked perfectly. Yet Admiral June remained focused. He knew the battle was far from over. "Begin strike pattern 7, he ordered calmly. Human officers immediately carried out the command. Across the battlefield, fleets that had appeared defensive only moments earlier suddenly surged forward. Human battleships accelerated directly into enemy formations. Council commanders watched in horror. To them, the maneuver looked reckless. Human ships were charging into the middle of the largest enemy force ever assembled. Hanul looked toward June. "What are they doing?" June did not take his eyes off the display. Finishing the job. The human fleet moved with terrifying precision. Instead of avoiding close combat, they embraced it. Battleships pushed deep into enemy territory, while cruisers protected their flanks. Smaller attack vessels slipped through gaps and targeted weakened command structures. Every movement supported another. Every action had a purpose. The Void Swarm attempted to reorganize, but the destruction of multiple command organisms had created chaos throughout their network. Orders arrived late or not at all. Some enemy formations attacked the wrong targets. Others simply drifted without coordination. Humanity exploited every weakness. Far beyond the main battlefield, Captain Hannah Kim and her strike teams continued their missions. Reports from reconnaissance units confirmed additional command organisms hidden throughout swarm territory. The enemy had never expected anyone to find them, much less attack them. One by one, human teams located these targets and destroyed them. Each successful strike weakened the swarm further. Hannah stood on the bridge of her stealth vessel as another target vanished in a massive explosion. Her communications officer smiled. "That's the fifth one." Hannah nodded. "Send confirmation to Admiral June." Back at Arion Prime, the message arrived seconds later. June reviewed the report and allowed himself a small smile. The operation was progressing even faster than expected. Mira noticed his reaction. "More command targets destroyed?" she asked. June nodded. "The enemy is losing its ability to think as a single force." The tactical display supported his claim. Swarm fleets that once moved with frightening coordination now appeared confused and fragmented. Human commanders immediately took advantage. New attack groups pushed into weakened sectors. Precision strikes eliminated key enemy assets. Slowly but surely, the enormous swarm armada began to collapse. Throughout the galaxy, military observers watched the battle through live transmissions. On distant worlds, citizens gathered around screens in public squares, shelters, and command centers. Many could hardly believe what they were seeing. For decades, the void swarm had seemed unstoppable. Entire civilizations had fallen before it. Yet now, human forces were driving it back. Hope spread faster than any news report. Refugees who had lost their homes finally saw a future worth believing in. On Arion Prime itself, celebrations began even while the battle continued. But inside the command center, June refused to relax. He understood something others did not. The void swarm still possessed enormous strength. A wounded enemy could be even more dangerous than a confident one. Hours later, his concern proved correct. New sensor reports appeared across the display. Remaining swarm fleets were changing direction. Instead of continuing their attack on Arion Prime, they were withdrawing. At first this seemed like victory. Council officers cheered. Several commanders congratulated one another. But June's expression darkened. Mira immediately noticed. "What's wrong?" she asked. June pointed toward the new flight paths. "They're not retreating." Mira studied the data. Slowly, realization appeared in her eyes. The enemy was not fleeing randomly. Every surviving fleet was moving toward a single destination. "Earth," she whispered. June nodded. The command center fell silent. Even Hanul looked stunned. "Why Earth?" he asked. Human intelligence officer Sue answered before June could speak. "Because they've finally realized where the threat is coming from." New reports continued arriving. Deep within enemy-controlled territory, something enormous was awakening. Long-range sensors struggled to understand what they were seeing. Vast concentrations of energy appeared around a hidden region of space. Entire fleets converged there. Remaining command signals throughout the swarm network suddenly became active. It was as if a sleeping giant had opened its eyes. Hannah's strike teams detected the same phenomenon from behind enemy lines. Her sensors recorded levels of activity unlike anything previously observed. She transmitted an emergency report to the flagship. Minutes later, June reviewed the information. His face became serious. Hanul noticed immediately. "What is it?" The admiral looked around the room before answering. "We've found their true leader." The room grew silent. For years, the galaxy had assumed the void swarm was simply a collective intelligence. Now evidence suggested something much larger controlled the entire species. June expanded the sensor data on the main display. A massive structure appeared in the center of the image. It was difficult to measure accurately because of its size. The thing was larger than moons, larger than stations, perhaps even larger than some planets. Organic energy pulsed throughout its surface like blood moving through veins. Countless swarm vessels gathered around it as if responding to a direct command. Mira stared at the image. "That's impossible." June shook his head. "No, that's the source." Every surviving enemy fleet was now moving toward that giant entity. The swarm had suffered devastating losses, but its supreme intelligence had finally revealed itself. More troubling was what happened next. New trajectories appeared on the display. The giant organism and its remaining forces were accelerating. Their destination was clear: Earth, humanity's homeworld. The command center erupted into urgent discussions. Some officers suggested defending Arion Prime first. Others argued that the enemy might still attack multiple targets. June listened quietly before raising his hand. The room immediately fell silent. "The battle here is over," he said. "The real battle starts now." Mira looked toward him. "You're going after it?" "Yes. Even if it means leaving the capital system?" June nodded. "If that thing reaches Earth, the war continues. If we destroy it, the war ends." The simplicity of the statement left little room for debate. Hanul slowly stepped forward. "What do you need from us?" June looked at the council leader. "Everything you can spare." For the first time since the war began, the council did not hesitate. Fleets from dozens of surviving civilizations immediately volunteered support. Supplies, ships, and personnel were offered without condition. Humanity had given the galaxy hope. Now the galaxy would stand beside humanity. Across the capital system, preparations began for the final campaign. Human fleets regrouped. Damaged ships received emergency repairs. Fresh supplies were loaded. Messages spread throughout Allied forces. The enemy's heart had finally been found. As the last reports from the battlefield arrived, Mira stood beside the observation window and watched thousands of human warships preparing for departure. Behind them, the remains of the shattered swarm fleet drifted through space. Ahead of them waited something far more dangerous. Deep within enemy territory, the supreme intelligence of the Void Swarm had revealed itself at last, and it was moving directly toward Earth. The final battle for the future of the galaxy was about to begin. Part 5. The stars seemed to blur as thousands of human and allied warships jumped into hyperspace together. The final campaign had begun. Across the galaxy, people watched with hope and fear as the combined fleet raced toward the source of the Void Swarm. Earth stood directly in the path of the enemy's supreme intelligence, and there would be no second chance if humanity failed. Inside the flagship, Admiral June Park stood before the tactical display, while officers monitored the fleet's progress. Around him, every station was active. Communications flowed constantly between human commanders and allied forces. Mira had chosen to accompany the fleet, along with Hanul and several council representatives. None of them wanted to remain behind while the fate of the galaxy was decided. Hours later, the fleet emerged from hyperspace near the outer edge of the Sol system. Immediately, warning alarms echoed across every bridge. The enemy had already arrived. What appeared on the sensors left even experienced commanders speechless. The supreme intelligence of the Void Swarm filled an entire region of space. It was larger than any object ever recorded by the Council. Endless streams of dark organic material stretched across its surface. Countless smaller vessels surrounded it like a protective shell. The thing looked less like a creature and more like a living world. Yet what shocked the observers most was its movement. It was heading directly toward Earth. Human defensive fleets had already formed a barrier between the enemy and the homeworld. Thousands of ships stood ready. Massive orbital weapons surrounded Earth itself. The blue planet shined peacefully beneath them, unaware of how close destruction had come. June studied the situation for several moments before speaking. "Open all fleet channels." Within seconds, his image appeared throughout the Allied armada. Pilots, soldiers, officers, and commanders listened carefully. "The enemy believes Earth is our weakness," he said calmly. "Today it learns that Earth is our strength." The message spread through every ship. Confidence replaced fear. Humanity had fought impossible battles before. This would simply be one more. Moments later, the first shots were fired. The final battle exploded across space. Human battleships unleashed enormous energy barrages while Allied fleets attacked from multiple directions. The Void Swarm answered immediately. Thousands of organic vessels surged forward like a tidal wave. Explosions lit the darkness as fleets collided. Entire formations disappeared beneath the violence. Yet unlike previous battles, the Allied forces did not break. They held their ground. Human commanders coordinated every movement with remarkable precision. Ships rotated positions to protect damaged vessels. Attack groups concentrated firepower on priority targets. Every sacrifice created an opportunity. Every loss gained valuable time. Meanwhile, Captain Hannah Kim led a separate operation deep behind enemy lines. Human intelligence had discovered one final weakness. The Supreme Intelligence was protected by layers of armor and escort fleets, but a narrow path existed near its central core. If a strike force could reach that location, the creature might be vulnerable. The mission would be almost impossible. Hannah volunteered immediately. A small group of specialized ships followed her through the chaos. Enemy vessels surrounded them from every direction. Several Allied escorts were destroyed protecting the formation. Yet the strike team continued forward. Back on the flagship, Mira watched the battle unfold with growing concern. Despite heavy enemy losses, the Supreme Intelligence continued advancing. Nothing seemed capable of stopping its movement. Entire sections of its surface absorbed damage and regenerated moments later. "Can we destroy it?" she asked quietly. June remained focused on the display. "Yes." His answer carried absolute certainty. Mira noticed something unusual. The Admiral had ordered many human ships into extremely dangerous positions. Some commanders would have considered the losses unacceptable. Yet every sacrifice served a purpose. Slowly, she began to understand. June was not trying to win a battle. He was trying to end a war. Hours passed. The fighting became even more intense. Human fleets pushed deeper toward the giant organism while Allied forces blocked enemy reinforcements. Earth remained protected, but only barely. Several swarm attack groups managed to approach the inner defensive perimeter before being destroyed. Across the planet, civilians watched the battle from shelters and command centers. They knew humanity was fighting not only for itself but for every living world in the galaxy. Then an urgent transmission arrived from Hannah's strike team. Her ships had reached the target zone. The opening to the creature's core existed exactly where intelligence predicted. However, the path was collapsing. Enemy defenses were adapting. If they waited any longer, the opportunity would disappear forever. June reviewed the report silently. Then he made a decision that stunned everyone around him. "Prepare my ship for direct assault." Mira immediately turned toward him. "What?" June looked at the tactical display. "The opening won't stay available." Hanul stepped forward. "Admiral, that's a suicide mission." June shook his head. "It's the mission." No one argued further. Deep down, they understood. Humanity's greatest strength had never been its technology or its weapons. It was its willingness to do what others could not. Minutes later, June's flagship broke formation and accelerated directly toward the Supreme Intelligence. Several escort vessels followed. Enemy fire filled the space around them. Explosions shook the hull repeatedly. Warning alarms echoed across the bridge. Yet the flagship continued forward. Hannah's strike team joined the attack from another direction. Together, they pushed through the narrowing opening. The giant organism reacted immediately. Massive energy surges erupted across its surface. Entire regions of space twisted under the pressure. Human ships were destroyed one after another. Still they advanced. Finally, the flagship reached the exposed core. For the first time, the heart of the void swarm was visible. A massive structure pulsed with dark energy at the center of the creature. Every command signal originated there. Every fleet movement depended on it. June stared at the target. "Lock weapons." His officers obeyed instantly. Every remaining system aboard the flagship transferred power to the main batteries. The ship itself began shutting down secondary functions to increase output. Hannah's team did the same. Around them, enemy forces closed in rapidly. There would be no escape. The final moment had arrived. June opened one last fleet-wide channel. Across the battlefield, millions heard his voice. "Humanity did not answer the call because we wanted power. We answered because no one should face the darkness alone." Then he gave the order. Every weapon fired at once. A blinding wave of energy struck the exposed core. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then cracks spread across the structure. Light erupted from within. The Supreme Intelligence convulsed violently. Massive energy storms exploded across its surface. Throughout the battlefield, every remaining swarm vessel suddenly stopped moving. Signals vanished. Formations collapsed. The giant organism began breaking apart from the inside. The explosion that followed was visible across entire star systems. When the light finally faded, the Supreme Intelligence was gone. Silence spread across the battlefield. One by one, surviving enemy vessels drifted lifelessly through space. Without their central control, they could no longer function. The war was over. Cheers erupted throughout the Allied fleet. Messages of victory spread faster than any signal in history. Across countless worlds, people celebrated. Civilizations that had stood on the edge of extinction finally had a future again. Weeks later, representatives from every surviving species gathered on Arion Prime. The galaxy was rebuilding. Trade routes reopened. Refugees returned home. New alliances formed. During a special ceremony, Hanul offered humanity a permanent leadership position within the Galactic Council. The proposal carried unanimous support. Humanity had saved them all. Yet when the invitation reached Earth, the response surprised everyone. Humanity politely declined. They had not fought for control. They had fought because it was the right thing to do. Years later, a historian named Jisoo completed the official record of the war. Her final words were preserved across thousands of worlds. She wrote that when every fleet had failed, when every defense line had fallen, and when hope itself seemed lost, humanity answered a desperate call from the stars. They did not come seeking glory or reward. They came because someone needed help. And from that day forward, whenever the galaxy faced the impossible, whenever darkness threatened the future once again, there was only one phrase anyone needed to say. Call the humans.